The 1967 Corvette L88, fabulously rare, phenomenally expensive, and for many people, the ultimate C2 Corvette Stingray. We're here in Central Florida at this extravagant automobile collection to talk about a 67 L88 coming to the Mecum auction in January in Kissimmee, Florida. And we're with Tom Hill, the curator of this collection. Before we talk about the car, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, my history is I worked for General Motors for 35 years. Started in St. Louis at the Corvette plant. Moved to Bowling Green, worked up in Detroit at the Tech Center as well as at the Proving Grounds, and spent most of my time associated one way or another with building Corvettes.
The Corvette that we're going to be talking about today, the 67 L88, certainly a seven-figure car in anybody's book. But JK, we've seen L88s before. Is this one even more, perhaps, desirable than others that we've seen?
Well, guys, what I think makes this car really special, at least in my view, is the fact that number one, it's a great car, high quality, but the color combination, a red fastback coupe.
The C2 coupes, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful shaped cars ever produced. And it looks really good in red, but with the red interior, it really does. It's an exciting looking car. But, you know, it's just a 67 Corvette until you open the hood.
That Mark IV big block platform that the 427 L80 is based on, we first saw it as a 396 in 1965, and development started later that year on the L88. Now, GM had to work sort of behind the scenes because that was a time period where General Motors was officially out of racing, but that didn't stop a handful of guys from saying, we want to sort of push the envelope. And by 1967, they had gone through some development work and were ready to make it as a regular production option. And I think that's the key. L88 is just a random number that's just the option code for that very special engine.
The engine in this car, not original, but it's authentic. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, the engine, it's an IT block. IT was the code for the L88 engine. It was a service engine that was put in the car back in period with no number, no VIN, because it had never been installed in a production car.
What do you think the person who buys this car is going to do with it? What's going through his head? Why is this car so desirable?
Well, this is a car has a lot to talk about. Because, like I say, it was just a 67 coupe until you opened the hood and started looking at all the other changes. It was brakes. It was the engine itself, the air cleaner. First cowl induction system ever on a car. This car did it. And it's kind of crude, but that's because it was very early in the development process to do that. These cars were not designed to drive on the street. When you look at the cooling system, the radiator has no fan shroud, and they used the aluminum small block radiator. They didn't do that because they wanted to keep the engine cool. They did it because it didn't weigh as much. So it was intended to be on the racetrack, not on the street. What really makes this big block feel different is the flywheel. It's got a smaller diameter clutch and flywheel assembly so that the engine revs quicker. Which is why a lot of them don't have their original blocks, because it could get away from you pretty quick. You couple that to the M22 transmission, and what made the M22 transmission, I mean, they're so famous because of the rock crusher, because they make a lot of noise. Well, the reason they made a lot of noise is because they were square-cut gears to make them stronger.
Let's go a little bit further on the driving experience. What is it like to drive that?
First of all, when you start the car up, there's no choke. You've got to keep the RPMs up to bring the engine up to temperature. Once the engine gets up to temperature, you need to make the car move. Because if you don't make the car move, it's going to overheat. And so it's a race car. Everything on this car is very analog. Its user feedback is very strong. There's no power steering on the car. You don't need power steering when you're going fast. And that's what this car was really intended to do.
Car has been through a high quality restoration. Give us some details on that.
This particular car was restored by the Neighbor Brothers down in Houston. And it was done back in the 90s. This is an older restoration, but I challenge you to look at it. It's beautiful. Gary and his brother did an outstanding job of making this car one of the best.
Tom, whenever you're talking about valuable cars, the first question a lot of people ask, how about the documentation? You've got a full binder of paperwork there, but there's one thing in particular I think you need to show her.
Yeah, this car, I mean, it's been documented. All the experts have looked at it. They know the car. This is by far the most important thing on the car. And I want to talk just real quickly. This is the build sheet. And everyone's heard that of the tank sticker. Well, a lot of people I don't think they understand what tank stickers are. They started putting tank stickers on the top of the gas tank in St. Louis for Corvettes in 1967. And the reason they did that is they were misbuilding cars. So the build sheet was very important because it corrected for a lot of mistakes that had taken place in prior model years. But don't look for a tank sticker on your 66 Corvette. It's not there.
Yeah.
The other thing, this is the gas tanker, the actual gas tanker for this one. It's actually job number 290. And if you start looking at the car closely, you'll see crayon marks with 290 on it, because that was the sequence number of the build of the car, not the serial number. They didn't care about serial number. They cared about the sequence number, because that was the order that the cars were built on that particular day.
JK, what does it mean to Mecum to have this car coming to their auction in January?
It's huge. You know, Mecum Auctions is the world's largest collector car auction company, and with Mecum Kissimmee being the largest single individual auction of all, every collector in the world is going to be aware that this car exists. And because they just don't come up for sale very often, obviously we're expecting a lot of attention on it. The Corvette world is going to acknowledge and recognize that this just isn't one of the 20 L88s. This one could very well be the best one in the world.
One last thing, you and I go back a ways. Back in 2014, he gave me my first ride in a C7, I'll never forget it. So, before we get to Kissimmee in January, you're gonna give me a ride in that?
I think we need to do that.
Yes!